Welcome to Manifesting Your Heart's Desires, the place where I get to teach you everything I know about manifesting and living a life that you absolutely love. I'm Beth McGill, your host, spiritual mentor and guide, energy healer with a unique perspective and experience as a hypnotherapist. So I am here today with a very special person that I just met last week. But when I meet amazing people, I want to bring them onto the show. I love meeting with other spiritual guides and teachers and bringing them on here to have a discussion and to talk about everything spirituality, because I believe that ultimately we're here for the expansion of our soul. So today I want to introduce you to Selina Maitreya, and she is a transformational agent. I just love that. And she is an internationally celebrated lecturer, author, and teacher of practical spirituality. I love that. Selina empowers her students by showing them how to reactivate and actualize their energy field so they can respond to any chaos that lands in their daily life from one of their highest frequencies: peace, kindness, compassion, tolerance, understanding, wisdom, gratitude, and grace. And that is definitely a place that I love being and living in. So that so resonates with me. And she teaches consciously choosing an energetic response to one's life that enables her students to be able to turn any difficulty into an opportunity to be in high frequency energy, which enables them to manifest their wishes and move through their life with peace and certainty, grace and ease. I just love all of that. My Facebook group is called High Energy Manifestors. So that totally resonates.
Perfect.
So welcome to the show, Selina. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Well, thank you, my dear. I was listening to that and I was thinking, knowing what you teach, that this really is such a wonderful match. So I'm so glad that we did meet and I'm very, very happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so I would love for you to tell us how you got started in this world of spirituality, when you first started, how it came to be.
Well, I'm about to be 69 years old, and I first was introduced to my first spiritual teacher, and my name was given to me when I was 16 years old. So very, very early on. I grew up in a family with some really great parents who were very good people, but very unhappy. And so our family was really went off track for a very, very long time. And I was a very lonely kid. And I was a very unhappy kid from the time I was about 11 on. When I was 16 years old, I went to college. I went to college early.
Wow.
And in my family, either kind of, the only reason you could leave home was to go to college. And I was really dying. I got to get out of the house. So I went to college in New York. At that time, I was introduced by a series of circumstances that I look back on now and know were divinely given, to a woman who was a teacher in New Orleans. And she became my spiritual teacher. That's where it all started. Fast forward, I kind of, as I moved back to Boston, I put my teaching on hold and I got married to a rock drummer, and life was sex, drugs, and rock and roll until that became not a healthy lifestyle. And I got sober at 28. And right afterwards, in my 30s, after I had married my second husband, I met my new teacher, who has been my teacher now for 26, 27 years. And Reverend Janice Hope Gorman, who is a beautiful spiritual center, the Hope Interfaith Center in Mankato, Minnesota, started sharing teachings with me that I didn't just read or study. I learned how to embody. In other words, these teachings became my guideline for how I was to run my life. And I was very serious about that at that point, and still am. And that changed my life, because we can read about spiritual practices, we can go to workshops, we can meet with a teacher once a month. But if you don't take the information and truly embody it and learn how to be the values that you espouse, that you love so much, we don't really transform a whole lot. So that was my journey. And in about the second or third time, Beth, I was sitting with Hope. A spirit literally started channeling through me. I didn't know what was happening. She explained it all to me. And then I worked very hard to have a very integral life so that I could continue to receive the messages of Source. And that has become a big part of my teaching. Source, and I call Source, it's the energy of oneness, the energy that comes into our bodies that helps us to become who we are. We all have oneness within us. People call it God, Yahweh, Buddha. And the oneness that channels through me has a very specific purpose, and their only purpose is to help each person that they speak to know what their next steps are, and they share wisdom so that the students can indeed become more and more conscious as they move through the world, embodying their beliefs and learning how to move forward in all of the frequencies you just listed, how we can be as integral as we can be as we move through our life, so that we're not visiting our spirituality. It really becomes very integral and integrated into who we are.
Yes. I love all that. Yeah. And one of the biggest ahas for me as I started in my spiritual journey later in life, but one of the ahas was that, oh, I'm a spiritual being having a physical experience. Mm-hmm. And as I was meditating today, it occurred to me that I think some people they hear that, but it doesn't quite resonate with them. And I think it's because we are in this physical body, but it's about being able to share with others, for me, that it transcends, like God, spirit, universe, that's the term I use, is within, but it's also without. It's everywhere, but that we have that power within us. So can you just maybe explain, and I think you just did that, but explain to you what spirituality is?
Well, I think spirituality is very different to a lot of different people. It's not only what it is, but how do we become that which we believe it is, mm-hmm. right? So there's, what do you think spirituality is, and how do you live that? Mm-hmm. And that's why the work I do is called practical spirituality, because they're teachings that teach us how to be that spiritual being you were just referring to in the third dimensional world. Mm-hmm. For me, spirituality is accepting responsibility for the choices I make in my life to live the divine frequency that I am. I look at a Selina or a Beth, and we would call this a me or an I, right? That's very one-dimensional. And it's not very accurate, because we're multidimensional beings. There's a physical body. I have a physical brain. There's a personality that's developed over time. I have a history of other lifetimes within this soul experience within my body. I have an emotional body. I have an intellectual body, right? All of these different manifestations of the life stream. And then we are frequency. There's the low frequency of the pain we experience, we call the egoic field. And what you were describing, my dear, the high frequency of the divine, that, as you accurately said, is everywhere, but it's also obviously what came into our form to make a life stream. So we are all of that. And spirituality for me is the opportunity for me to choose to move in this third dimensional reality, not from my pain, not from my thinking mind, believe it or not, and not from my emotional body, but from the GPS system, my guidance system of my highest knowing, because my soul level, my intuitive body, is what came into this form to bring life. And it is what's going to leave this physicality at the end of this particular journey. And that's what I want to be my guidance system. So for me, spirituality is really the choice I have to lead my life with my highest knowing as my guidance system.
And it's such a great opportunity too. Like, I feel like it's limitless and it's fearless in everything you just mentioned. It's really living a life without fear. I feel once I understood I was a spiritual being having a temporary physical experience, I feel very empowered. I'm like, this is cool because I don't just have a soul. I'm embodying my soul. I am my soul and I'm never alone. And that too was very, very empowering for me, because before my perspective was I was a physical being having a spiritual experience, which was very unempowering. So I would like to hear a little bit about your daily practice. I know for me, having that great big aha that I'm a spiritual being having a physical experience and learning how to tap into my knowing, that came to me very, it was just an opportunity. I just sat one day and said, God, who am I? I sat for 5 minutes, and that was the beginning of my spiritual journey and my meditation practice, which I continue today. But that's what gets me tapped in to my higher source, and it allows me to communicate with my soul. What kind of practices do you do daily?
Well, I would say that my daily life is my practice, because I look at my daily life, and every choice I have to make and every experience I have, whether I'm here with you, which is a pleasure, or I'm with my students, or I'm talking to my super, or I'm walking in the morning and meeting neighbors on the way. My life is really my practice, because that's where all of the difficulties pop up. That's where, you go to meditation and you pray, you're not in any place of difficulty, right? Those are places that are extra wonderful opportunities for us to have a direct connection with the divine within. For me, I've worked to bring the divine within out 24/7. That doesn't mean I don't get frustrated or angry or have those moments of fear. But what it does mean, Beth, is that I am in constant awareness as I move through the day. I have a practice, which is one of the practices, if we were to break down what my daily life looks like as a practice, I walk in awareness. I walk in what we call witnessing as you be. Most of us just walk through the world, just do stuff, and we're not watching how we are. We're not watching where our state is. We're not watching where the emotions come in or the negative thoughts come in. We'll stop if something is really catches our attention. But for the most part, people are just walking through their life. But I have a practice where I'm very present, so that as soon as I notice that my emotional body is out of alignment with my highest knowing, because when our highest knowing is our guidance system, then that means it directs us. And anything that takes us away from that direction is a distraction. And so emotions take us away from that neutral space of the soul. So as I notice that I'm being distracted, whether I'm uberly excited or I feel a negative thought or an emotion, I notice it, and I have practices that I transform, and I'm back to neutral. So that's how I work through my day. I do go to quiet. I love being in quiet. I had a car event in 2013 that took me out of my life for many years in terms of any normal life. And the majority of the time, I was in communication with Source in oneness. And it's important for me to go to quiet a lot, just because it recharges me, and because I'm a pretty visible person, and I exchange a lot with my students, with my neighbors, with my friends, and I'm constantly needing to fill my spiritual bank account. And part of that comes from going to quiet. And part of that just comes from living a life that really is an awareness.
That is one of my favorite words, awareness, and that's definitely the very first thing that I teach. Like you said, most people are blindly just going through their life, going through the motions. They're on this hamster wheel, just doing what they think they should be doing, and often are not aware of what they're thinking, or that they have a choice of what they're thinking, which then affects how they're feeling. So I totally agree, 100%. I love that. Yes, it's really embodying practicing what you are teaching, and having it be a state of being. That's what I heard. It's a state of being in communion. And yeah, that's very powerful. I love that. And I love the quiet.
Well, I do too. And I would share with the people that are listening, because this is so important to know. Coming to any place of awareness is a lot of work and effort and commitment. And I make a point of saying that because I want people to understand, and most of us don't have this perspective perhaps, that when we come into a body as children, as babies, we are at that point when we're born, that's probably the time when we are our purest, when we are the energy of love that came into this body more than anything, because our brain at that point hasn't been developed. It's just starting. We haven't had experiences yet. All we are is love. And it's so incredible. It's kind of like when you're in a restaurant. I mean, if you've noticed this, Beth, and a baby comes in, somebody wheels a baby in, and everybody's like looking and craning to see this baby, like everybody is. And there's really nothing special about one baby versus the other visually, but it's like this idea, like everybody knows somewhere that this is the energy, this being is the closest thing to source.
Yeah.
And what happens after that is we get conditioned. We get conditioned by our parents, by society. And the conditioning isn't, okay, you have this incredible divinity within you. It's you've got a brain. It's you have an emotional body. It's, what are your feelings and what are you thinking and why weren't you thinking and why weren't you feeling and how do you feel more and how do you think more? And all of those faculties are important. But because we're so conditioned to overemphasize our thinking and our emotions, and then, of course, in a lot of places, we're trained in a lot of families, without knowing it, we're trained to really focus on the difficulty. Families that have historic cultural trauma, understandably, have had a lot of difficulty. And so that's passed on sometimes from generation to generation, energetically, because we are energy bodies. And so by the time we get to a place where we're in our life, whether it's early as I was or later on, as you shared that you had come to consciousness, we have a lot of undoing to do before we're able to make the shifts that we'd like to. And most people don't understand that there's so much effort and repetition that goes into the practices we put into place just to become aware, which is the first step to making any change in our life, is to have awareness of how we be in our life so that we can see what it is we need to shift. And then we need to have the tools to shift, because it's not enough to tell people, hey, got to be aware and let's shift. We have to show them how to shift. And I get concerned because in today's world, the way we have so many drive-through banks and drive-through food opportunities and places you can buy liquor drive-through and places you can do all things, and everything is all about quick. This is not a quick journey. And there are practices we can do that temporarily put us into other states of being. But when somebody truly wants to transform how they be, and they want to unlearn the habits that don't serve their highest good and the highest good for all, and become a conscious being in their moments, because this isn't about perfection, but it's about being aware, and it's about being heart-centered, and it's really making sure that you understand you do have those choices, as you said, that people don't feel they have, and that you are choosing in every moment every decision you make is a decision for your highest good and the highest good for all. So I don't want to leave anybody feeling like you have to be rigorous and, oh my God, what if you make a mistake? No, there are no mistakes to make here. It's just that in this world of let's do it quick, fast, easy, and cheap, transformation, true transformation is a commitment.
Yes, yes, it is definitely. And one of the things I realize as I'm working with people, they'll tell you, oh, I have this belief or I have this thing. And I love asking them, why? Like, what is it? Where did it come from? Are you sure it's yours? Because oftentimes we think we believe things but they're not our beliefs. We don't actually believe it. We just think that we believe it. Mm-hmm. So yes, those paradigms, those stories, that things that our parents tell us, and then we take them into being an adult, and they're not even our belief. It's something my grandmother told me, or my parents, or my teachers, or my siblings told me, that as a young child, I took on as a belief that doesn't even resonate with me.
Yeah.
So yes, there's a lot of unraveling and working through that. But I believe that if someone really wants to, they have that desire, then I think it's much easier.
I think desire is a very important component, and it's the desire to live a full, deep, rich life of knowing. And knowing isn't intellectual. Knowing is insightful. Knowing is learning how to sense. You know, when I was breaking down all the different parts of who we are and our multidimensionality, you know, one of the things we learn here at Practical Spirituality is to do the questioning you were talking about, but we question not only where did this come from, but what aspect of my being is believing this? Is it my ego, which is wrapped up in the pain body? Is it or is it my highest knowing? We begin to take on responsibility for our life stream and looking at what aspects of us are working at any time. So if we are feeling in a state of not being in peace, we're dysregulated, we can determine if it's the ego. We know right away that the ego never tells us the truth. The ego is very important and helpful, but it's fear. And there's a time for fear that you know, it's time that fear can be helpful. For instance, you're in New York City where I lived, and you're standing on a busy street on the sidewalk, and you decide to you kind of space out, and then you walk into the street and you go, oh my God, didn't look to the left, didn't look to the right. Your fear will pop you back on the curb. That's a wonderful place to have fear. Maybe you're going out the door to take a walk, and you're halfway down and the stairs from where you live, and you go, oh, forgot my keys, got to go back and get my keys, and hopefully you've left the door open. Those moments are helpful, but the way we use fear now, or more accurately, the way fear uses us, is not helpful. So looking at what aspects of us are holding what we believe to be truth, and keeping an open field for truth to be able to shift, because there's so many beautiful truths in this work. And one of the wonderful truths that Spirit shared with me is that everything that can help can harm, and everything that can harm can heal. And so there are times that something might have been a truth for a grandparent, or it might have been a truth for one of us, but it no longer is a truth, because everything is dynamic, everything is shifting, everything is changing. So being flexible, being open, being able to be curious, being curious is such an incredible tool in this work, because that's where the passion you were talking about came in. That's where, this is so important to me, and I want to be open and curious to it, instead of feeling grounded in something that you just know is true. That's ego, is the groundedness, that, okay, it's got to be like this. Being open and being inquisitive, that's when you're working on higher frequency.
Curious is lighthearted too. I know when my mother passed away in 2012, she was my best friend, and she passed away very quickly, like within 2 weeks. And it was like, I felt like my whole world turned upside down.
Mm.
And before that, I had never been open to spirituality. I was still very ingrained in this religion. And the last words that my mother told me were to get back into the Bible. And as much as I tried to do that, the experience of losing her and my best friend, I noticed, number one, I got really aware. And I noticed that I literally felt like my world was upside down. I felt that emotionally. And then what I also noticed is that I had this intense curiosity. I had a curiosity that I felt like I wanted to ask every question. I didn't even know what the questions were, but I literally wanted to question every belief I had ever had. And that curiosity, that openness to say, what if, like, I don't know anything anymore. If my best friend can die, I don't know anything. And because that wasn't supposed to happen. And so I left myself open to this curiosity, questioning everything. And that literally started my spiritual journey as well, even before I started the 5-minute practice of meditating. And I believe that my mother was a part of that and was a part of leading me to being curious, to look for those things and led me actually to find answers that helped me along the way. So I love the part of curiosity instead of just thinking, oh, I know how to do this, or I know that I should be doing this. And I also love the part that you said about I think it was not judging, or it's about releasing any judgments or not having freedom from, this is my responsibility. I'm not going to blame my education. I'm not going to blame my parents. I'm not going to blame any outside sources. But this journey, this is my journey. I'm going to take responsibility for it. I'm going to own it. And therefore, we start to own our life. We start to own that we do create our own reality.
Yeah. Well, I'm struck by the humility you're taught when you were talking about the loss of your friend and the loss of your mother. Those are big pieces of difficulty. And the work we do here is to always respond to difficulty, to learn how to respond to difficulty from higher vibrations. And you really experienced and have just expressed great humility when you said, in the loss of your mom and then the loss of your friend, you felt as if you didn't know anything. That's great humility. And when we're in great humility, we're not in the ego. We are in the divine. So I would ask that during this call, all the people listening, just think about the fact that there's low frequency energy of the ego, high frequency energy of the divine. So we're moving from one field to another constantly throughout our day, whether you consider yourself spiritual or not. This is a reality of the human condition, because we can use all the phrases of, high frequency and physicality, soul level in a human body, whatever, but we are all of that. And although each of us has a different physicality, a different history, we have different likes and wants, we all have one common denominator, and that is oneness, the divinity within us. That's love. That's what we all share. And so you can always tell what state you're in by looking at what you're saying, how you're feeling. Am I in low frequency of the ego, or am I in the high frequency? Because Beth, in this physicality, we can't be in both at the same time. The physical world has rules like gravity. And one of the rules is you can't go upstairs and down at the same time. You can't be sick and healthy, and you can't be in your low frequency at the same time you're in your high frequency. So what happened for you was a doorway was opened when the loss happened. And instead of continuing on in the conditioning, you had great humility, and you had an opening, and you took it, and you went right into the high frequency in that moment, which doesn't mean you don't revisit low frequency again, but that made such an impact on you. And I think it's just a great visual that people can use to understand even more what we're talking about, because frequency, for anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about, which is understandable, or just can't comprehend it, remember that in the physical world that we all live in, frequency is huge. We have EKGs and EEGs that literally measure the frequency in our brain and the very real frequency in our heart. When we sit in front of a TV, and it's so funny, Beth, when my boys were younger and I was divorced from their dad, and I was a single parent. The boys used to joke that mom does not know. Oh my God, she's such a loser, quote unquote. But I mean, they were very kind about it. But mom, could you just understand how the TV remote works, please? And I just never got it because I'm not into TV. But what I do know and what I do love about a TV is that what it does is it takes all the frequency. We live with frequency around us that we can't see every single day. And those remotes that everybody's using that my kids wanted me to learn how to use, they take, I don't know how they do it. Couldn't tell you if my life depended on it, but it takes the frequency that's floating around everywhere. This is fact, right? And it takes it through that little remote and through the TV and somehow takes the right frequency for CNN or for Netflix or for whatever. And that's exactly what we're doing in our lives when we get conscious. We have all this frequency going on in our system, but we learn how to be aware and we learn how to choose the frequency that serves us best. Yeah. And that's what you did, maybe even unknowingly, when you had your loss.
Yeah, it definitely was unknowing, but I did have the awareness because I remember when I was feeling this questioning, especially right after that, and I didn't understand about quantum physics or anything at that time, but I remember the grass was greener. I remember that I was experiencing more beauty around me. I was paying attention to the little bird that was dancing in my yard, so those kinds of things. So I love that explanation of how that opened me up. And the other thing is too, since you're just using that analogy of a TV, it's like there's also one TV, but there's a plethora of shows we can watch. So let's just say there's 100 different shows we can watch. You can choose one that's about a horror movie that's in lower frequency, or you can watch a love story, right? So it's just like that with life. We get to choose which frequency. We have that control. No one is making you watch a certain TV show, right? You get to choose with your remote which show you want to watch. There's a lot of shows, but you get to choose which one you're watching. And I think people so oftentimes give their life choice away. So that's why I love talking about spirituality, because it really brings back, and I love that you're talking about being in it unconditionally, not letting the frequency around us in our environment. Yes, we're going to experience it, but like you said, if we're grounded and knowing who we are, it's definitely going to affect us less. So.
And that's also that ability. I mean, the ability to have choice is one we're all born with, because when we were born, we were given what's called free will. And free will is very easily explained. Free will is the choice to choose the highest knowing as your response to any event or experience or not. Free will is your choice to believe there is a higher knowing or not. So free will in its essence is the choice to not believe in the divine if you choose, or to believe in it, right? So we all have choice. We forget, as you were saying, that we have that because we're very often conditioned to think we don't. The other piece of what you were saying that I wanted to comment on is the concept of embodiment. Embodiment happens as a more mature student moves forward. When people start to come to this work, the first thing we work on is awareness, is where are you in your world? What are you noticing? We're looking at their breath. Most people, when they come, have very shallow breath. And breath is the manifestations. Another piece that I love, Spirit shared with me very early on, that the breath is what comes into the body and is actually the physical manifestation of the soul, which is why we in yoga, We breathe into the movements. We're coordinating the physicality with the divine within us, which is the breath. The breath is the first thing that comes into the body. And when people die, I've been watching an awful lot of videos of people who are hospice workers. I love listening and hearing their stories about transition. And the breath is the very last thing they tell us that leaves, right? And so the breath is the physical manifestation of the soul. And it's so beautiful. So we learn about awareness. We learn where our breath is. We look at the lives and look and see in the daily life of a student, what does it look like? Where are there places where they're out of alignment with leading a life, where awareness and openness and choice come in? And then we work from awareness, and we work where the difficulty is in their life. What are the relationships that are difficult? What are the situations that are there? And we actually get very granular in terms of their responses to certain situations. And they're taught practices to be able to respond to situations that are now very difficult, and they're not walking in their highest frequency, to being able to handle those with incredible ease. So those are some of the things students start to work on. It's a process where way down the line, they're able to embody. So I want people, as they're hearing this, to understand that, yes, embodiment is actually what we're looking for sure. But there's so much to do beforehand. I wouldn't want anybody to get discouraged and think, oh my God, I'm not embodying my spirituality. If you're a spiritual student listening to this, if you've studied with teachers and read books and gone to workshops, then you're absolutely correct that the next step might be embodiment. But if you're newer to the work, just learn how to be aware of how you move through the world and take it from there.
Absolutely. When I was still teaching full-time years ago, I had met my mentor, Bob Proctor, and he had given us these coins. And the coin said, respond from a place of love. And that on the other side, it said, react from a place of fear. And it was a real heavy coin. And I kept that coin in my pocket as I was teaching throughout the day, as a reminder, because I knew that was an important concept to learn. And I had it in my pocket as a reminder for 1.5 years. I'm not kidding. Until I got to the point where I knew that I wanted to respond from love, and I didn't have to remind myself anymore. So yes, it's
very, yeah.
It's take a while.
And it should take as long as it takes. And because what happens is if we want it to progress before the time is appropriate for it, we're not really working in the energy of oneness, because we're not patient. Love has so many manifestations. There's patience and kindness and tolerance and grace and gratitude and ease and understanding and compassion. And fear has as many, faces as well. And the practice of patience, good for you. 1.5 years is nothing. Patience is an incredible attribute to cultivate. It's a beautiful, beautiful manifestation of love. And I say that because it's the one that I have worked on quite a bit. And, bringing that really, really brings us to a point where I think it's really helpful to share with people as well, that Spirit shared with me many years ago, that when souls come into bodies, souls exist in oneness. And I have a great experience of oneness, because it's where I was taken when my car was hit. And it was what I had access to without thinking about it for 5 years. And now I still have access, but now that my brain is healed, I have to work to get that access. But oneness is a place that is beyond words, and there are no words to describe the feeling. I could tell you that there is no light, there is no sound, there is nothing. And when I go to oneness, I am nothing. So a soul that comes out of that environment and into a body comes with a purpose. And the purpose is to shift, to tweak, to heal an aspect of itself. And because there is a specific aspect that soul wants to heal as it enters the physical body. Most people, when they start to do the work here and look at where are they out of alignment, are out of alignment with love in very specific places. And it shows up very consistently in their life in that one place or at a few places, maybe one or two places, very consistently. Doesn't mean we're not out of alignment in other places, but when we really take a deep dive, we can see consistencies. And for me, it's always been patience. And patience is something that I cultivated a great deal during my 10-year brain injury healing. And so we all have these aspects that we are in this life. I call it the higher octave purpose. You know, the 3D life is here. Things happen on the 3D level that are difficult, but what's the higher octave purpose? Sure, you want to fix the fact that you don't have a job now, for sure, or there's something with your healing or something in a relationship. All of that gets fixed in the 3D world, but why is it happening to begin with? What's the higher octave purpose here? And we get to learn through the work what the higher octave purpose is. And that's where life opens up a whole lot, because we're working with higher vibration.
Yeah. That's why I'm so grateful that I found my purpose in life, which has nothing to do with money or anything else. It's being able to teach people, number one, that they can have this awareness and that they can choose to live a life, be in joy, live a life that they love. But like you were saying, yes, it takes some work. It takes some awareness. There's some things that you can do. There's some inspired actions that you can take. And as you can tell from listening to us having this conversation today, there's always something to learn. I'm learning new things every day. And Selina, I'm sure that you are too. And one of the things I love to do is I love to write, but I also love to read. So I would love, Selina, for you to share a little bit about your book, which is Raise Your Frequency, Transform Your Life. And I'm all about transformation and frequency. So just tell us a bit about your book, what inspired you to write it, and where people can find it.
Well, thank you. It's coming out in June. People can pre-order it now. My publisher is Inner Traditions. They are an incredibly established publisher, been around for 30 years. And Raise Your Frequency, Transform Your Life, how to respond from love to daily difficulties, to life's difficulties, actually. Wasn't a book that I chose to write. It was a book that was actually given to me. In 2013, I sold the house that my children grew up in. I had been a single parent for the last 15 years in that house, and I worked mightily. I worked very hard. I had a career as a consultant to photographers around the world. I had written 2 books and lectured over 150 times throughout North and South America. And it was time for us to sell the house. The boys were grown, and they had women that they're now married to that they love. And everything was going really well. I was moving to New York. I was going to drop my consulting business after 25 years and be a teacher full time because I had 2 careers, running concurrently. And 2 days before closing on my house, on the very first day of my life, my next life, I was driving to the house to clean it out, and a woman ran a red light and hit my car. And I was left with a traumatic brain injury. In the car, Spirit channeled through me and told me what was happening. So I was alerted to the fact that this was a Spirit-created event. But a year into this very traumatic brain injury, where taking a shower was a big event, Spirit told me to write a book. And I've never said no to Spirit, never, ever, ever. However, I laughed. And I said, "You've got to be kidding me. I can't type. I can't read a newspaper. I have no organizational skills," because my brain injury was very severe. And I couldn't handle light or sound, and the vibration from other people was so evident. One of the things I learned, Beth, is that our brain has the capacity to sort out all this energy. We don't see it around us because that's part of what the brain is doing. But when my brain was injured, energy was like a block. It was like a wall. So I thought Spirit was crazy to ask me to write a book. But they said, just record into your phone. And so for 4 years, I channeled down the teachings from the oneness. and recorded it into my phone and my computer. And when I was well enough to type consistently, which was 5 years into this, really took me out of my life quite a bit. I started to create a manuscript. And then Spirit, since my car event, I was pretty much on the way there. But from the car event out, I have been completely directed by Source. So I don't sit down and think anymore. I was a big planner. I was a marketing consultant to photographers. I've always had this strategic mind. All of that went away. And I was just asked to surrender to the divine in 2013 when the car event happened. So all of those natural skills I had disappeared. Mm-hmm. And so I have been following Source's lead. Now I am, Source directs me. They directed me 6 times in the last 10 years to move. Now, a person with a brain injury, the last thing you want to do is be packing up and moving all the time. And I had lived in one house in 20 years. So I went from living with my boys in a house in a neighborhood that we loved so much to living in 6 places in 10 years. But every single place they took me to was purposeful for my healing, for my growth, and for the book. And so I stopped directing and I started listening to Source. So when they told me to write the book, I found a way to do it. They moved me from New York to Woodstock. Within days, I met the woman who edited my book. And then I started, when the book was done, I started to try to sell it. Selling a book that is teaching people how to use vibration to change their state, even in our world that welcomes spirituality. Spirituality is still in its infancy as a medium, even though we have a lot of buzzwords. People are just coming into it through yoga, coming into it through meditation. It was a really hard sell to sell this book. And so Spirit said, put it down. You just put it down and create work study groups around the book. So I have students who come to me, and I have students who came to me then one-on-one. And so I created work study groups, and I took 30 people to a 10-month course that was based around the book. Every month we'd study a chapter, and the book is filled with teachings and practices that teach you very directly and specifically how to take all the steps to learn how to transform, how to actually do the transformation. And so we would study the chapters. People would go off. I would discuss the chapters. People would go off and use the information because the book's information is a workbook. It's made to have you go out and use these practices in your daily life. And the transformation that people were seeing, I have therapists, I have medical doctors in the Army. I have lawyers, CEOs, CFOs, housewives, artists, entrepreneurs who were using this information. I mean, the cross spectrum of age, of men, of women, and all of them were making huge changes. And at the end of that 10-month period, a woman I knew from New York called me up out of the blue, and she said, I've just made a deal with one of my artists with a publishing company in Vermont, and they are very established, and I think they'd really like your book. And so I gave her the okay to walk it in, and 3 days later, I had a deal. And I spoke to the acquisitions editor in our traditions, and they absolutely saw the value. They understood enough to see the value and know that nobody had ever written a book like this and how helpful it would be. So it's coming out in June. People can, I'll give you the link. You can place it below. And people can indeed buy it and start to transform their life. So it is a workbook that teaches you how to use any difficulty in your life. So whether you're new to the path or well along, we all have difficulty, and we get to learn how to use it as an opportunity to bring in peace, to bring in more consciousness, because when we respond to difficulty, not from our conditioned response of creating more difficulty, people will be driving on the road and somebody cuts you off and you're spacing out because you're just spacing out watching the road, and somebody cuts you off and you get all startled. What happens? You're egoic mind kicks in because you're frightened. Fear comes in, understandably. And so what do people do? They're not responding with, oh, have a great day, and I'm hoping you're okay. Maybe you should slow down, drive safely. It's no, let's give them the finger, let's curse, let's scream. And that is so emblematic of how we deal with difficulty. We're conditioned to respond to difficulty with more of the same, right? Comes back to being a child. When you're a baby, what is the very first thing as humans we do? When we're a baby, we cry if something's wrong. When we don't have the capacity for communication and we're young babies, we get wet, we cry. It's a problem, we cry. So what we're doing is we're learning a new response to a very age-old response of responding to difficulty with more of the same. And when we respond from love, we become the love. When we learn how to say to that person in the 8 items or less, counter at the food store, who's got the basket full of things, and they're going 1, 2, and you're standing there freaking out. When you learn how to have your freak out be an alert, and you start breathing into it or using one of the other techniques that can transform your state, then you have agency over your life. And that's the purpose of the book, to give us all agency over our life, to help us use difficulty as a tool to go to peace.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Just have to send those people love. And that's a process to get there. But it's been so much fun chatting with you today.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that people are going to check out your book. And what is your website so they can also look there?
Sure. It's Practical Spirituality with Selina. And anybody who's interested in potentially working with me, just shoot me an email. My email address is on the site. Selina's Selina. And we'll set up a free hour call. I love to talk to people, find out where you are on the path, tell you about practical spirituality, and see if it's the body of work for you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Beth. And thank you for all the work you do for all of us. Honestly, it's just so wonderful to have the kind of work that you do in our world.
And it's so important for those of us that are teaching spirituality, teaching healing, no matter what it is. We all have such a unique voice. We all have such unique gifts. So supporting one another is very important. So that's what I'm doing here. And that's what I love to do. And I would love to see the comments too. So if you have a comment regarding the information here, you might have heard something today that you've never heard before. I invite you to be curious. I invite you to, if you are curious, you've heard something here that you're not sure about, write a comment, because I always check out the comments and respond to them. So again, thank you so much. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon next week. Take care. Bye-bye.